The moment I knew my son no longer deserved his father's legacy wasn't when Harold drew his final breath after a brutal 8-month battle with cancer. It wasn't during the 45 years of marriage when Harold built his shipping empire from nothing, while Daniel enjoyed the fruits without understanding the sacrifice. No, it was when I stood alone beside my husband's mahogany casket, rain pelting the cemetery's green canopy, and stared at the empty chair where our only son should have been. He said he'd try to make it back for the burial. Mrs. Mitchell, whispered Melissa, Harold's executive assistant of 20 years, her eyes red-rimmed as she squeezed my hand. Something about Serena's birthday celebration running long. A birthday celebration! While his father, the man who had given him everything, was being lowered into the cold Chicago earth. I nodded, my face a mask of dignity, despite the hurricane of rage building inside me. The funeral director glanced at me questioningly, clearly wondering if we should wait. The other mourners, hundreds of Harold's employees, business associates, and friends, shifted uncomfortably, witnessing the final insult from a son to his father. "Begin," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. As the pastor spoke words that blurred in my grief, my mind drifted to the conversation Harold and I had shared just weeks before his death. His once powerful frame diminished by disease, but his eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had built Mitchell Shipping into a billion-dollar enterprise. "He's not ready for it, Grace," Harold had said, his voice raspy from the tubes they'd only recently removed. "Maybe he never will be." "He's 42 years old," I'd argued, more out of habit than conviction. I'd been defending Daniel to his father for decades, a maternal instinct I couldn't seem to outgrow. "He'll step up when the time comes." Harold's laugh had dissolved into a coughing fit. When he recovered, he'd reached for the folder his lawyer had left. "That's why I've made provisions. The final choice will be yours, Grace. You'll know what to do when the time comes." Now, watching the casket descend without Daniel there to say goodbye, I finally understood what Harold had meant. I finally knew what I had to do. The reception at our Lakeshore Drive penthouse was a somber affair, business associates sharing stories of Harold's brilliance and generosity. I moved among them like a ghost, accepting condolences with practiced grace while checking my phone. No messages from Daniel. At 6:27 p.m., 4 hours after the funeral ended, the elevator chimed. Daniel strode in, his designer suit immaculate, Serena clinging to his arm in a dress entirely too festive for the occasion. Neither looked appropriately grief-stricken. "Mother," said Daniel, kissing my cheek with cool efficiency. "Sorry we couldn't stay longer at the service. Serena's party had been planned for months. You understand?" I looked at my son, Harold's golden boy, with his father's strong jaw but none of his character, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. "The reading of the will is tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said, my voice devoid of the warmth I'd always reserved for him. "Harold's attorney insists all beneficiaries be present." "About that," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Serena and I were hoping to fly to Aspen tonight. Can't we just handle the formalities next week?" Behind him, Melissa gasped softly. Several of Harold's oldest friends turned away, unable to witness such callousness. "No, Daniel, we cannot. Ice had replaced the blood in my veins. Be there, or the consequences will be significant." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He'd never heard that tone from his doting mother before. "Fine, we'll reschedule our flight." As they turned to leave, not bothering to speak with any of the mourners who had actually stayed to honor Harold, I caught Serena eyeing the antique vase collection Harold had spent decades curating, mentally calculating its worth, no doubt. Later that night, alone in the bedroom I'd shared with Harold for over 40 decades, I opened the safe hidden behind his portrait. Inside was the envelope he'd instructed me to read after the funeral. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. "My dearest Grace," his letter began, "if you're reading this, two things have happened. I've left this world, and Daniel has finally shown you who he truly is. I've never wanted to break your heart by saying this, But our son is not the man we raised him to be. Tears blurred my vision as I read Harold's final instructions. The provision in the will, the choice he had left to me, the power to ensure Daniel would never profit from the father he couldn't be bothered to bury. "You'll make the right decision," Harold's letter concluded. "You always do." As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, bathing our bedroom in golden light, I made my choice. Daniel would learn tomorrow that actions and absences have consequences. I whispered to the empty room, to the husband no longer beside me. If you're watching this story unfold, please subscribe to see what happens when my son learns the truth. Some lessons come at a price he never expected to pay. The lawyer's office awaited, and so did justice. The mahogany-paneled conference room of Harrington and Associates fell silent as Gregory Harrington, Harold's attorney and friend of 30 years, adjusted his reading glasses. 10 people sat around the massive table. Myself, Daniel and Serena, Harold's sister Ruth, our granddaughter Emily, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, 2 company executives, the director of Harold's charitable foundation, and Gregory's legal associate. Daniel checked his watch repeatedly, making no effort to hide his impatience. Serena scrolled through her phone under the table, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. Beside them sat their 22-year-old daughter, eyes red from genuine grief. Unlike her father, she had visited Harold regularly during his illness, reading to him when his eyes grew too weak to manage his beloved historical biographies. "Before we begin," Gregory said, his voice grave, "I want to express my deepest condolences, Grace. Harold was not just my client, but my dear friend." I nodded, clutching the handkerchief Harold had given me on our 40th anniversary. "Thank you, Gregory. Please proceed." Gregory opened the thick document before him. "This last will and testament of Harold James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body at the time of its creation 6 months ago, represents his final wishes for the distribution of his estate, valued at approximately $1.2 billion. Serena's head snapped up from her phone. Daniel straightened in his chair. "I'll summarize the standard provisions," Gregory continued. "The Lakeshore Drive penthouse and summer home in Door County are bequeathed to Grace Mitchell, along with all personal effects and an immediate cash transfer of $50 million. Daniel nodded impatiently. This was expected. "Mitchell Shipping Company voting shares are to be distributed as follows." Gregory paused, glancing at me briefly before continuing. "To Daniel Mitchell, son of the deceased," Daniel leaned forward eagerly, "conditional upon the moral character clause on page 27, section B." "What moral character clause?" Daniel interrupted, frowning. Gregory flipped pages methodically. "The clause reads as follows. The bequest to my son Daniel is conditional upon my wife Grace's sole discretion regarding his conduct during my final days and funeral arrangements. Should Grace deem his behavior disrespectful, negligent, or inappropriate, she may invoke this clause to redirect his inheritance as outlined in Alternative Distribution Plan C." The blood drained from Daniel's face. "That can't be legal." "I assure you it is. Your father had it vetted by 3 separate legal teams. The courts have consistently upheld moral character clauses when clearly defined, as this one is." Serena grabbed Daniel's arm. "What does this mean?" Gregory looked to me. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you wish to invoke the moral character clause?" All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I saw 42 years of excusing Daniel's behavior flash before me. The missed family holidays, the disrespect toward his father, the gradual prioritizing of Serena's extravagant wants over family needs, and finally, the empty chair at Harold's funeral while Daniel attended a birthday party. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering, "I invoke the clause." Daniel leaped to his feet. "Mother, you can't be serious!" "You left your father's funeral to attend a party, Daniel. You couldn't spare one day to properly say goodbye to the man who gave you everything?" "It was Serena's 40th birthday celebration. We had guests flying in from Europe. It cost a fortune." "And that was more important than burying your father?" Emily covered her mouth, stifling a sob at her father's callousness. Gregory cleared his throat. "In the event the clause is invoked, Alternative Distribution Plan C directs that Daniel Mitchell's inheritance be redistributed as follows: 30% to the Harold Mitchell Foundation for educational opportunity, 30% to Emily Mitchell, 30% to Mitchell Shipping Pension Enhancement, and 10% to Grace Mitchell to distribute at her discretion. Serena's face contorted with rage. You planned this. This is elder manipulation. The only manipulation, Gregory interjected firmly, was Harold's careful legal planning to protect his legacy from precisely this attitude. Daniel slumped back into his chair, shell-shocked. So I get nothing? 40 years as his son, and I get nothing. You received everything a son could want. A father who loved you, who built something for you, who wanted nothing more than your respect in return. This is ridiculous, Daniel sputtered. I'll contest it. I'll fight this in court. You're welcome to try. But Harold anticipated that response. The will includes a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will forfeits even the minimal provisions granted elsewhere. What minimal provisions? Daniel demanded. Gregory turned a page. Your father left you his first desk, the folding card table where he wrote his business plan, and his collection of books on business ethics. In any other circumstance, the irony might have been comical. Now it just felt tragic. Serena stood abruptly. We're leaving. Daniel, call Jensen. We need a lawyer who will actually fight for us. She stormed out, not bothering to close the door behind her. Daniel followed, pausing at the threshold to look back at me. I'll never forgive you for this, Mother, he said, his voice cold with fury. After they left, Gregory continued reading the remaining provisions. Emily would receive her portion in a structured trust. The charitable foundation would focus on scholarships for underprivileged youth. The employee pension enhancements would ensure security for those who had helped build Harold's dream. When the reading concluded and others filed out, Emily stayed behind, moving to sit beside me. Grandma, she whispered, taking my hand. I'm so sorry about Dad. Harold deserved better. I squeezed her fingers. Your grandfather loved you very much, Emily. He saw in you what he had hoped to see in your father. As we left the office together, I felt both heartbroken and resolute. Harold had given me the power to make this choice, knowing the pain it would cause me. But he'd also known I would choose rightly, no matter how difficult. I paused in the lobby, a strange compulsion coming over me once again. If you're following this story, I said softly, please subscribe to see what happens next. The battle for Harold's legacy has only just begun, and Daniel won't surrender a $1 billion inheritance without a fight. Emily gave me a curious look. Grandma, who are you talking to? I smiled sadly. Just an old woman's habit, dear. Sometimes I imagine sharing our family story might help others make better choices than we did. The week following the will reading unfolded like a carefully orchestrated war. Daniel launched his offensive immediately, calling me 17 times the first day alone. I let each call go to voicemail, listening later as his messages evolved from rage, "How could you do this to your own son?" to bargaining, "We can work something out, Mother," to thinly veiled threats, "You won't like what happens if you don't fix this." Serena's approach was more direct. She appeared at my front house unannounced, the doorman apologetically explaining she'd claimed a family emergency. I found her in the living room examining Harold's antique watch collection with undisguised avarice. "Serena," I said, remaining in the doorway, "this isn't a good time." "It's never a good time to discover you've been disinherited, is it?" she replied, setting down a platinum pocket watch worth more than most cars. "Grace, we both know this situation can be resolved easily." I raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" "You're upset about the funeral. I understand." Her practiced sympathy felt like oil on water. "Daniel should have stayed longer. I take full responsibility. It was my party after all." "The party you couldn't postpone despite your father-in-law's death?" She waved dismissively. "Harold was already gone. The funeral was just formality." In that moment, I saw exactly what Harold had seen years ago when he first met Serena, the calculating ambition behind the polished exterior. My son had chosen his partner poorly, but that had been his choice to make. Serena, The will reflects Harold's wishes, not mine. I simply honored them. Her facade cracked. This is absurd. Daniel is his only son. Being a son is more than biology. It's presence, respect, love. Things Daniel withheld even as Harold was dying. Serena's eyes narrowed. We can contest this, drag it through courts for years. Is that what you want for Harold's legacy? Public spectacle, family laundry aired for everyone to see? If that's the path Daniel chooses, so be it. She reached for her handbag, a $30,000 Hermes that Harold had given her last Christmas. You'll regret this, Grace. Daniel isn't the only one who can make difficult choices. After she left, I sank into Harold's favorite chair, exhaustion washing over me. Our penthouse, once filled with Harold's booming laugh and endless energy, felt cavernous in his absence. I picked up the framed photo from his desk. Daniel at age 10, sitting proudly on the bow of Harold's first commercial vessel, father and son beaming in matching captain's hats. Where did we lose him, Harold? I whispered to the empty room. The next morning brought another surprise visitor. Emily stood at my door clutching a box of my favorite pastries, her expression a mix of determination and anxiety. Grandma, I hope it's okay that I came. Dad's been difficult since the will reading. I ushered her inside. You're always welcome here, sweetheart. Over tea, she revealed the chaos erupting at Daniel and Serena's home. They're talking about selling the house, their art collection, even Mom's old jewelry that was supposed to be mine someday. Serena keeps saying they're suddenly cash poor because of you. I shook my head sadly. Your father makes $1.2 million annually as regional director for Mitchell Shipping. That position remains his. Harold never wanted to leave him destitute, only to ensure the company legacy was protected. They don't see it that way, Grandma. They're meeting with lawyers, talking about undue influence and your cognitive state. Serena suggested you were too grief-stricken to make rational decisions. The irony wasn't lost on me. And what do you think, Emily? Her eyes, so like Harold's, met mine steadily. I think Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing, and so do you. That afternoon, Gregory called to inform me that Daniel had indeed filed preliminary paperwork contesting the will. He's claiming you're emotionally compromised by grief and that Harold was under medication that affected his judgment when the will was updated. Both expected, I replied. What's your assessment? Their case is weak. We have video of Harold explaining his reasoning, medical certificates of competency, and multiple witnesses. But litigation is always unpredictable and expensive. Harold left me well prepared for this fight, I assured him. The following days brought another development. Mitchell Shipping employees, from dock workers to executives, began sending cards, stopping by with food, calling to offer support. They'd heard rumors of Daniel's challenge and wanted to know they stood with Harold's vision. Your husband saved my family when he kept paying my salary during my cancer treatment, said Lewis, a 30-year shipping manager. We never forgot that kind of leadership. It was during this outpouring that I discovered Harold's final gift to me. Melissa, his longtime assistant, delivered a sealed envelope that Harold had instructed her to hold until Grace needs to remember why she's fighting. Inside was a letter and a small key. The letter read simply, "For when Daniel forces your hand, Storage Unit 447. All my love, always." The storage facility was climate-controlled, used primarily for Harold's overflow business archives. Unit 447 contained a single item, a video camera connected to a television. A post-it note on the screen read, "Press play." Harold's face filled the screen, healthy and strong, recorded before his diagnosis. Hello, my darling Grace. If you're watching this, then Daniel has chosen his path, and you've honored my wishes despite the pain it's causing you. Tears streamed down my face as Harold outlined evidence he had been gathering for years, documentation of Daniel's mismanagement of company resources, his absence from critical meetings, reports from concerned executives, a complete case file supporting the difficult decision we'd made. I couldn't bear to show you this while I lived, Harold continued. You always wanted to see the best in our son, but I needed to protect what we built, not just for wealth, but for the thousands of families who depend on Mitchell Shipping doing business the right way. As the video ended, Harold looked directly into the camera. Stay strong, my love. Remember that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is to hold them accountable, even when it breaks our hearts. I left the storage unit with renewed resolve, Harold's wisdom fortifying me for the battle ahead. That evening, as I looked out over the Chicago skyline from what was now my penthouse, I felt a familiar compulsion. If you've been following this difficult journey, please subscribe and share this story. Sometimes the hardest decisions we make for those we love are the ones they fight against the most. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a stern-faced courier who couldn't meet my eyes. 56 pages of allegations. My deteriorating mental state, Harold's medication-induced confusion, and most painful of all, claims that I had manipulated my dying husband against our only son out of jealousy over Daniel's relationship with Serena. I set the documents on Harold's desk, now mine, and called Gregory immediately. "They've gone nuclear," he said after I described the filing. "This isn't just contesting the will anymore. They're attacking your capacity, your character, and your marriage." All to avoid admitting Daniel couldn't spare one day to properly bury his father, I replied, surprised by my own steady voice. "Grace, you should know, they've requested Harold's medical records, your phone records, and they're seeking depositions from household staff. They're looking for anything to suggest you influenced Harold unduly during his illness." A cold anger settled in my chest. Let him look. Harold and I made this decision together, with clear minds and broken hearts. That afternoon, the first reporter called. Somehow, news of the Mitchell family dispute had leaked. By evening, 3 different Chicago business publications had reached out for comment. "Mitchell shipping heir battles widow over billion-dollar estate," read one headline already circulating online. Emily called, distressed. "Dad gave an interview. Grandma, he's telling people you've had episodes since Grandpa got sick, that you've been confused, vindictive." "Are you surprised?" I asked gently. I knew he was desperate. "But this," her voice cracked, "he's dragging your name through mud for money. Money he doesn't even need." "It was never about need with your father, Emily. It was about what he felt entitled to." The next morning, Melissa arrived at the penthouse with a thick folder. "Mrs. Mitchell, I thought you should see this." The communications team had prepared it after the news broke. Inside was a comprehensive media strategy to defend both Harold's decision and my enforcement of it. Press statements emphasizing Harold's sound mind, testimonials from executives about Daniel's absenteeism, carefully curated photos showing Daniel missing from important company events while vacationing in exotic locations. "Harold authorized this?" I asked, stunned by the thoroughness. Melissa nodded. 6 months ago, he said, "If Daniel forces a public fight, we'll be ready to defend Grace's honor with the truth." Even from beyond, Harold was protecting me. I touched the wedding band I still wore, feeling his presence. "Let's hold off," I decided. "We'll respond if needed, but I won't fire the first shot against my own son in public." Melissa seemed relieved. "That's what Mr. Mitchell predicted you'd say. There's something else." She pulled a sealed envelope from her bag. "He asked me to give you this if Daniel went to the press." Inside was a handwritten note and a memory card. Harold's note read, "The nuclear option. Your call, my love. Use only if Daniel leaves no alternative." The memory card contained video footage. Daniel at company events, visibly intoxicated, making inappropriate comments to employees. Daniel arguing viciously with Harold during his illness, accusing him of emotional manipulation for asking him to attend board meetings. Daniel and Serena mocking Harold's cancer symptoms when they thought no one was listening. I locked the card in the safe, sick at heart. Harold had known it might come to this, but had left the choice to me, the power to destroy our son's reputation with evidence of his own behavior. The lawsuit's first hearing was scheduled for the following week. In preparation, Gregory arranged for me to be examined by 3 independent psychological experts to counter Daniel's claims about my mental state. All 3 reports confirm what we know. You're perfectly competent, exhibiting appropriate grief, but no cognitive impairment. Will it be enough? Combined with Harold's precautionary videos explaining his decision-making process, it should be. But Daniel has hired Grayson Mills. I recognize the name, Chicago's most aggressive state litigator, infamous for scorched earth tactics. Prepare for personal attacks in court, Gregory warned. They'll try to provoke you, make you appear unstable or vindictive. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered our penthouse, touching Harold's belongings. His reading glasses still on the nightstand, his favorite sweater I couldn't bear to move from the closet. In his study, I found myself opening drawers I'd avoided since his death. In the bottom drawer of his desk was a leather journal I'd never seen before. The first entry was dated 5 years earlier. Daniel missed another board meeting today, 3rd this quarter, claimed Serena needed him for some charity gala. The board is noticing. Worse, he's noticing that they notice. Pride wounded, he lashed out, accused me of embarrassing him. When did my son start believing he deserves power without responsibility? I read for hours, tears streaming as Harold chronicled his growing concerns about Daniel, his attempts to mentor him, and eventually his painful decision to protect the company from his own son's sense of entitlement. The final entry, written 2 weeks before his death, broke my heart. I failed him, Grace, or perhaps we both did, giving him too much while asking too little. The hardest part of dying isn't leaving the company, or even leaving you, my love. It's knowing I won't be here to help Daniel become the man he could still be. That burden now falls to you, and it's heavier than any I've asked you to bear. The next morning, I called Emily. I need you to deliver a message to your father. Tell him I'm willing to meet, just the 2 of us. No lawyers, no Serena. Do you think he'll come? She asked doubtfully. Tell him it's about a potential settlement, I replied. He'll come. 2 days later, Daniel arrived at the penthouse, dressed impeccably, but with new lines etching his face. Mother, he said, stiffly, declining my offer of coffee, Emily said you wanted to discuss terms. I wanted to give you one chance to withdraw your lawsuit before things get uglier, I said simply. He laughed bitterly. Withdraw? You've stolen my birthright. Your father made a choice, Daniel. I honored it. Because I missed part of the funeral? One day's mistake cost me $1 billion? I shook my head sadly. It wasn't one day. It was years of days. Moments when your father needed his son and found a stranger instead. Convenient interpretation after he's gone, Daniel sneered. He never complained to me. He tried, Daniel. For years he tried. His expression hardened. Well, now it's up to the courts, and they don't rule based on missed father-son moments. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Daniel, I have videos. Harold documented everything. Your behavior at company events, your comments about his illness, everything. He froze, color draining from his face. You're bluffing. Your father was a meticulous man. You know that. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes, the first crack in his righteousness. Then his jaw set. Release whatever you want. Serena and I have already given interviews about your fragile mental state. Who do you think will believe? The grieving, confused widow, or the son fighting for his legacy? After he left, I sat alone in the growing darkness, Harold's journal clutched to my chest. The battle lines were drawn. My son had chosen scorched earth over reconciliation. For those following this painful journey, I whispered to the silent room, don't forget to subscribe. Before the story ends, you'll see how far a son will go to claim what he believes is his, and how firmly a mother must stand to honor her husband's final wish. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters as Gregory helped me from the car. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, voices calling out questions that blurred together in a cacophony. Mrs. Mitchell, did you manipulate your husband's will? Is it true your son was excluded for missing the funeral? Are you suffering from dementia as your son claims? Gregory guided me through the gauntlet, his arm steady around my shoulders. No comments until after the hearing, he repeated firmly. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Journalists, curious lawyers, and a surprising number of Mitchell shipping employees had gathered. In the front row sat Emily, who had texted earlier that she would attend despite her father's fury. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, brave smile. Daniel and Serena entered from the side door with their attorney, Grayson Mills, a razor-thin man with cold eyes and a reputation for destroying witnesses. Daniel was impeccably dressed in a conservative suit that reminded me painfully of Harold, while Serena wore widow-like black, a collected visual statement. Judge Lorraine Hayes, a veteran of the probate court with silver hair and piercing eyes, called the hearing to order precisely at 9 a.m. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding the Mitchell estate," she began. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Mr. Mills, as the petitioner's counsel, you may begin." Mills approached the bench with practiced gravity. "Your Honor, this case centers on a grievous injustice. Daniel Mitchell, the only son of the deceased Harold Mitchell, has been effectively disinherited through the manipulation of a moral character clause, a clause inserted during Harold Mitchell's final illness when he was heavily medicated and susceptible to influence. He gestured dramatically toward me. Mrs. Grace Mitchell, driven by personal grievances and declining cognitive function, convinced her dying husband to create this punitive measure, then wielded it vindictively when her son missed portions of the funeral to attend a long-planned family event. The characterization was so false I almost laughed aloud. Gregory squeezed my hand in warning. We will demonstrate that Harold Mitchell was not of sound mind when this clause was added, that Mrs. Mitchell exhibited controlling behaviors throughout his illness, and that the disinheritance represents a gross deviation from Harold Mitchell's previously expressed wishes for his son to lead his company. Judge Hayes nodded without expression. Mr. Harrington. Gregory rose, the picture of dignified restraint next to Mills's theatrical presentation. Your Honor, Harold Mitchell was a meticulous businessman who built a billion-dollar company through careful planning and clear-eyed assessment of people's capabilities. That same methodical approach extended to his estate planning. He gestured to the thick binders before the judge. The documentation we've provided demonstrates 3 critical facts. First, Harold Mitchell was certified mentally competent by multiple physicians throughout his illness, including the day the moral clause was added. Second, the clause itself was not a last-minute addition, but consistent with Harold's long-standing concerns about his son's commitment to the company and its values. And third, Mrs. Mitchell's invocation of the clause was not capricious, but the culmination of years of troubling behavior by Daniel Mitchell, behavior that reached its nadir when he chose to attend his wife's birthday celebration rather than fully participate in his father's funeral. Gregory paused and then added quietly, "This case isn't about a mother's vindictiveness. It's about a father's right to ensure his life's work continues in capable, committed hands." For the next 2 hours, both sides presented preliminary arguments and evidence. Mills introduced affidavits from Daniel and Serena's social circle, claiming I had seemed confused and irrationally angry at Daniel during Harold's illness. Gregory countered with medical reports confirming my cognitive health and Harold's competency. The most dramatic moment came when Mills played a video deposition from Daniel and Serena's household chef, who claimed to have overheard me telling Harold, "Daniel doesn't deserve anything you built." Gregory immediately stood. "Your Honor, context is critical here. We have the complete recording of that conversation." With the judge's permission, Gregory played Harold's own recording of that day, showing that my comment came after Daniel had failed to visit his father despite being in town, sending Serena instead with the excuse that he had more important meetings. The full quote was, "Daniel doesn't deserve anything you built if he can't even visit you when you're dying. It breaks my heart to say it, Harold, but it's true." Harold's voice, weak but determined, had responded, "I know, Grace. I've known for years. I just didn't want to admit it." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Daniel's face flushed crimson. Near the hearing's conclusion, Judge Hayes addressed both parties directly. This case clearly involved complex family dynamics beyond legal considerations. Before we proceed to full litigation, I'm ordering both parties to mediation. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell, this is an opportunity to resolve these matters privately before more damage is done to your family and to Mr. Mitchell's business legacy. As we gathered our belongings after adjournment, I noticed Emily approaching Daniel, speaking intensely. He shook his head repeatedly, Serena pulling at his arm while glaring at Emily. Outside, the media waited like vultures. Daniel and Serena reached the doors first, Mills guiding them to a microphone stand. "Today's hearing was just the beginning," Daniel announced to the cameras. "We're confident the court will recognize that my father's true wishes are being subverted. No son should be disinherited for missing part of a funeral due to prior family commitments." When my turn came, Gregory advised a simple, no comment. But something in me rebelled against Daniel's sanitized version of events. "I have only one statement," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "This case isn't about a missed funeral. It's about honoring Harold Mitchell's carefully considered wishes for the company he built. He loved his son, but he loved the thousands of employees who depend on Mitchell Shipping even more." Back at the penthouse, exhaustion overwhelmed me. The public spectacle had been every bit as draining as Gregory had warned. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Grandma, can I come over? I need to talk to you about something important." An hour later, Emily sat across from me, her young face grave. "Dad's desperate, Grandma. After the hearing, I overheard him and Serena arguing with Mr. Mills. They're planning to release medical records suggesting Grandpa had episodes of confusion, even though they knew it wasn't true." My heart sank. They would damage Harold's reputation posthumously. "Serena's idea," Emily confirmed. She said, "Dead men can't defend their mental state," and Dad looked uncomfortable but didn't object. I closed my eyes briefly. "What else, Emily?" She hesitated. "They're also planning to subpoena my mother." Teresa, Daniel's first wife, had remained friendly with Harold and I after the divorce, much to Daniel and Serena's annoyance. "They think Mom will testify that you never liked Serena and turned Grandpa against her, and by extension, against Daniel." After Emily left, I stood at the window watching nightfall over Chicago, the city Harold had loved. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more public scrutiny, more damage to the Mitchell name that Harold had worked so hard to make synonymous with integrity. For the first time since this began, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Would Harold want his reputation posthumously dissected? Would he want Emily caught between her father and grandmother? Would he want the company name dragged through tabloid headlines? As doubt crept in, I found myself speaking again to invisible witnesses of our family's tragedy. I said softly, "If you're still following this painful journey, subscribe to see what happens when protecting a legacy means risking everything else. Sometimes standing firm means standing alone. But is the cost too high?" The European shipping contract crisis required immediate attention. By 9 a.m. the next morning, I sat in Harold's former office at Mitchell Shipping headquarters, surrounded by anxious executives. "Mars is threatening to pull $140 million in annual business," explained Patrick, the acting CEO. "Their representative specifically cited leadership uncertainty following the public disputes." "They've been with us 20 years, I noted, scanning the contract details. "This isn't just about headlines." "No," Patrick agreed grimly. Daniel contacted them directly last week, apparently claiming he would soon resume control and wanted to renegotiate terms. They were confused by the competing messages. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. He had deliberately undermined the company's stability. It appears so. After 2 hours of emergency strategy, we salvaged the relationship through a video call where I personally reassured Mars's leadership about the company's stability. Their relief was palpable when I confirmed that the succession plan Harold had established, promoting from within rather than installing Daniel, would be honored. As the executives filed out, Patrick lingered. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's something else you should know. Several senior staff have received aggressive job inquiries from Serena. She's trying to identify who might be sympathetic to Daniel's position. She's looking for inside information, I realized. Or worse, trying to poach talent if they lose the case. Yes, and Daniel has been accessing sensitive files as regional director. He still has high-level clearances. I made an immediate decision. Restrict his access. If he asks why, refer him to legal." "That's a significant step," Patrick cautioned. "He is still an employee." "An employee actively working against company interests," I countered. "Harold would have done the same." By afternoon, the predictable explosion occurred. Daniel stormed into the headquarters lobby demanding to see me. Security called upstairs, and I instructed them to escort him to Harold's office. He burst in, face flushed with rage. "You've locked me out of my own company's systems." "Your father's company," I corrected calmly. "The one you're currently trying to damage through litigation and unauthorized contact with our partners. I built relationships with those partners for years. Relationships you're now leveraging to create instability. That stops today." Daniel paced, running his hands through his hair, a gesture so like Harold's that my heart constricted despite everything. "This is absurd. I'm fighting for what's rightfully mine." "No, Daniel. You're fighting for what you believe you're entitled to. There's a difference." He stopped pacing, his voice dropping dangerously. "You know what Serena says? She says you've always been jealous of me, that you resented how Dad groomed me to take over." The accusation was so ludicrous, I almost laughed. "Is that what she tells you, Daniel? Your father and I spent 20 years trying to interest you in the actual business, beyond the corner office and the expense account. You showed up for the glamour and disappeared for the work." "That's not true," he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "It is true. Harold documented everything. The missed meetings, the botched negotiations you didn't prepare for, and the employees whose names you never bothered to learn after a decade." Daniel slammed his hand on the desk. "Stop talking about me like I was some disappointment. Dad was proud of me." "He loved you desperately," I said quietly. "That's different from pride." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a moment of painful clarity. "Listen to me, Daniel. The company is already suffering from your actions. Contracts in jeopardy, employees distracted, stock value fluctuating. Is that really what you want? To damage what your father built just to claim ownership of its ruins?" "I want what's mine," he repeated, but with less conviction. "Even if getting it destroys everything else, your reputation, the company's stability." I paused, watching him carefully. "Your marriage." His head snapped up. "What about my marriage? Do you really believe Serena would stay if there's no inheritance coming? No social status as Mitchell Shipping's heir apparent?" "That's a disgusting insinuation," he snarled, but again his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "Is it? Tell me, where is she now, Daniel?" "Meeting with the lawyers, planning the next attack." "When was the last time she asked how you're feeling about losing your father?" His face crumpled momentarily before hardening again. "You don't know anything about my marriage." "I know that before Serena, you visited your father every Sunday. I know that you once valued traditions like Harold's birthday fishing trips. All that changed when she decided those things weren't worth your time." "That's not fair." "And I know she was complaining about visiting your dying father in the hospital, calling it putting in her time until the payoff. Emily overheard her." "Emily? She's lying." "When has Emily ever lied to you? Even when you missed her birthdays, her graduation, she never made up stories about you. She's always loved you too much for that. For a moment, Daniel looked lost, the confident, angry man replaced by a confused son trying to reconcile uncomfortable truths. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shut down. "Serena needs me at the lawyer's office," he said stiffly. "This conversation is over." As he reached the door, I called after him. "Daniel, whatever you decide about the lawsuit, know this. Harold's greatest regret wasn't disinheriting you. It was failing to help you become the man he knew you could be." He paused without turning, his shoulders tense. Then he walked out without another word. That evening, Emily called in tears. "Ted came to my apartment. He asked if what you said was true about Serena's phone call. I told him everything. He just sat there, then left without saying anything. I'm worried about him, Grandma." I assured her she did the right thing, though my own concern was growing. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals. Later, I received a text from Daniel himself, the first direct communication he had initiated since the will reading. "We need to talk. Not about the lawsuit. About Dad." "Tomorrow," I responded simply. "Come for breakfast, 8 a.m. Sleep eluded me that night. I wandered the penthouse, eventually finding myself in Harold's closet, running my fingers over his suits, inhaling the fading scent of his aftershave. In the pocket of his favorite jacket, I found a small notebook I had never seen, different from his business journal. The first page read simply, "Things I wish for Daniel." What followed were not material bequests, but hopes that he finds purpose beyond wealth, that he values relationships over status, that he discovers the satisfaction of building something meaningful, that he becomes a father who shows up for Emily. By the final pages, Harold's handwriting had grown shakier, written during his illness, that he understands someday why I made this choice, that he forgives both Grace and me, that he discovers it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched this hidden testament to Harold's enduring hope for our son. Even as he'd made the painful decision to redirect Daniel's inheritance, he'd never stopped believing in his potential for growth. "Oh, Harold," I whispered into the empty room, "what would you have me do now?" As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, I carefully placed the notebook on the breakfast table where Daniel would sit. Whatever happened next, he needed to hear his father's voice, not through lawyers or legal documents, but heart to heart, even across the divide of death. "For those still following this painful journey," I said softly to the golden morning light, "make sure you're subscribed to see the final chapter. Tomorrow may bring either reconciliation or permanent rupture. But whatever comes, we'll face it with the courage Harold always valued above all else." Daniel arrived precisely at 8, alone and visibly exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of neglect. His shirt slightly wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He looked older than his 42 years, grief and stress having etched new lines around his mouth. "You came," I said simply, opening the door wider. "I said I would." His voice lacked its recent hostility, replaced by a weary flatness that concerned me more. I led him to the kitchen where I'd prepared Harold's traditional weekend breakfast: scrambled eggs with herbs, sourdough toast, and strong black coffee. For decades, this had been our family ritual until Serena had deemed it boring and introduced Daniel to champagne brunches at upscale hotels instead. Daniel stared at the familiar spread. "You remembered." Some traditions matter enough to preserve. We sat across from each other, the morning sun streaming through windows that showcased Chicago awakening below us. For several minutes, we ate in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, Daniel set down his fork. "Serena's gone." Though I'd suspected this might happen, hearing the confirmation brought no satisfaction. "I'm sorry." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Are you? You practically predicted it." "Being right about something painful doesn't make it less painful to witness," I replied. "What happened?" Daniel stared into his coffee. After our conversation yesterday, I confronted her about what Emily overheard. She denied it at first, then got angry that I would question her loyalty. He shook his head. We argued. Things were said. I asked her directly if she would stay if there was no inheritance coming, no prestigious position at Mitchell Shipping, and she packed 3 suitcases, took her jewelry, including Mom's tennis bracelet you gave me for her last birthday, and said she didn't sign up for this humiliation. His voice cracked slightly. 12 years of marriage, and she was gone within an hour. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. Our first physical contact since the funeral. He didn't pull away. I'm truly sorry, Daniel. Despite everything, I never wanted this pain for you. He nodded, then noticed Harold's small notebook beside his plate. What's this? Something of your father's I found last night. I think he would want you to have it. Daniel opened it hesitantly, his expression changing as he read the first page. For the next 20 minutes, he sat in complete silence, turning pages slowly, occasionally wiping at his eyes. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his face, the defensive anger replaced by raw grief. He never told me any of this, Daniel whispered. Would you have listened? I asked gently. He closed the notebook carefully. No, probably not. After a long pause, he added, I didn't know him at all, did I? You knew the father who loved you unconditionally. You didn't know the man who built something extraordinary through sacrifice and integrity. I poured more coffee for both of us. He wanted you to know both. Daniel stared out at the city skyline, Harold's beloved Chicago, where he'd started with one leased dock and a second-hand tugboat. I remember when I was 10. Dad took me to the original dock where he started. It was still operational then, just a tiny fraction of the company. He introduced me to every worker by name, knew their kids' names too. They all respected him so much. His voice grew distant with memory. I told him I wanted to be just like him when I grew up. You still can be, I said quietly. Not in running his company, that opportunity has passed, but in understanding what actually made him remarkable, which was his belief that success meant nothing without integrity, that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege, that showing up for people who depend on you matters more than any bottom line. Daniel absorbed this in silence, turning Harold's notebook over in his hands. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, the entitled air replaced by someone more thoughtful, more vulnerable. I'm dropping the lawsuit. Relief washed through me, but I kept my expression neutral. Why? Because Dad was right. Daniel met my eyes directly. I haven't earned it, and fighting you through the courts won't change that fact. What about your lawyers, Serena? Serena's gone. As for Mills, he can bill me for services rendered and then terminate our relationship. Daniel straightened his shoulders. I'll handle it today. We moved to the living room where photos of our family through the years lined the bookshelves. Daniel stopped before a picture of himself at 16, standing proudly beside Harold on the deck of the company's flagship vessel. I had so many chances, he said softly. He kept giving me opportunities to step up, to learn, to grow. I squandered them all. Not all, I corrected. You're here now, making a difficult but right decision. That counts for something. What happens next? He asked me, turning to me. With the company? With us? The company will continue as Harold planned, managed by people who share his values and vision. As for us, I chose my words carefully. That depends on what you want, Daniel. I don't know what I want anymore, he admitted. Everything I thought mattered, the money, the status, Serena, it's all gone or going. I'm 42 years old and I have to start over. Perhaps that's exactly what you need. He nodded slowly. Maybe so. As Daniel prepared to leave, he paused at the door. There's one more thing. I want to apologize to Emily. I've been a terrible father to her. It's never too late to change that, I said, thinking of Harold's final wish in his notebook. Would you... Daniel hesitated, showing a humility I rarely seen. Would you be there when I talk to her? I might need help finding the right words. Of course. After he left, I stood alone in the penthouse that had once vibrated with Harold's energy and vision. For the first time since his death, I felt something beyond grief, a quiet certainty that we had reached a turning point. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Harold's death, 3 figures stood beside his grave in the November sunshine. Daniel, Emily, and I placed white roses, Harold's favorite, against the simple granite headstone. "He would be proud today," I said, watching Daniel adjust his tie, not the expensive designer brands he once favored, but a modest one suitable for his new position as Community Outreach Director for the Harold Mitchell Foundation. After dropping the lawsuit, Daniel had surprised everyone by asking not for money or position, but for a chance to learn about his father's philanthropic vision. Starting at the bottom, he'd spent months visiting Mitchell Shipping's community initiatives, learning firsthand about the educational programs and economic development projects Harold had quietly funded for decades. Emily, now completing her master's degree in environmental science with funding from her grandfather's trust, slipped her arm through her father's arm. Remember last week at the scholarship ceremony when that kid from Southside said Grandpa's program was the only reason he could attend college? Your speech was perfect, Dad. I just told them what I've been learning myself, that true legacy isn't about money or buildings. It's about impact on lives.
As we walked back toward the cars, Daniel lingered, letting Emily go ahead. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something. The company's educational initiative for employees' children, I'd like to expand it, create a presence in more neighborhoods, especially underserved areas." "That sounds exactly like something your father would support," I replied, warmth spreading through my chest at his use of mom rather than the formal mother he had adopted during the Serena years. "Would you look at the proposal with me next week? Your input would be valuable." "I'd be honored." As we reached the cemetery gates, I felt that familiar urge one last time. Looking out at the golden autumn leaves, I spoke to those who had witnessed our journey. "If you followed our story to its conclusion," I said softly, "remember that true inheritance isn't what's written in legal documents. It's the values we live by, the impact we have on others, and the courage to begin again when we've lost our way. Please share the story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more journeys of healing and redemption." Daniel gave me a curious look. "Who are you talking to, Mom?" I smiled, linking my arm through his. "Just an old woman's habit. Sometimes I like to imagine our story might help others navigate their own difficult paths, like Dad's journal helped me." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. As we drove away from the cemetery, I glanced in the rearview mirror at Harold's final resting place. The painful choice he'd entrusted to me had ultimately achieved exactly what he hoped. Not punishment for our son, but transformation. Daniel wouldn't lead Mitchell Shipping as Harold had once dreamed, but he was finally becoming the man his father had always believed he could be. Some legacies, I realized, are measured not in dollars, but in wisdom finally received, lessons painfully learned, and relationships painstakingly restored. And by that measure, Harold Mitchell's legacy was richer than ever. Back at the penthouse later that evening, I found myself standing at the large window overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights flickering like Harold's eyes when he used to speak about the future. There was a time I feared that future had died with him. But now, watching Daniel walk the path Harold had hoped he'd one day choose, I felt a peace I hadn't known since the funeral. Emily joined me with 2 cups of tea, and we stood side by side, quiet, both of us letting the stillness fill us. "You think he'll keep going?" she asked softly. "I think he's begun," I replied. "That's the hardest part." "I was angry for so long," she said after a moment, her voice breaking a little. "He missed everything. My childhood, my graduation, even my first published paper. I didn't think I could forgive him." "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Emily. It means choosing to move forward without allowing the past to dictate your future. Just as your grandfather forgave Daniel every time he showed up late or not at all, just as I'm learning to forgive too." He asked if I'd go with him next week to one of the outreach events. He wants to speak at a high school in Bronzeville. I smiled. "And will you?" I told him yes. She sipped her tea. He looked so relieved. "He's learning how to be a father. Even if it's late, it's not too late." Emily rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you fought for Grandpa's wishes."
I fought for all of us, I said gently, touching Harold's notebook that he'd left for Daniel, now kept safely on our bookshelf. Your grandfather always believed we were meant for more than comfort and inheritance. He believed in purpose. A few days later, Daniel sent me a draft of the new community proposal. It was thoughtful, detailed, and clearly driven by something deeper than image or duty. As I made notes in the margins, I found myself smiling. He was finally beginning to think like Harold. Long-term, people first, humble. On the cover page was a dedication I hadn't expected. For Harold Mitchell, who showed me the man I still have time to become. I wept then, not out of sadness, but release. Grief, yes, but also joy. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Not every parent gets to see their child grow into wisdom. But sometimes, if you are willing to stand alone long enough, to hold the line when it breaks your heart, the seeds you plant finally bloom. The final board meeting of the year was held the following week. I attended in my capacity as honorary advisor, and Daniel presented the initiative with calm confidence and vision. The same executives who had once rolled their eyes at his absence now nodded with cautious approval. Afterward, Patrick approached me. "He's changing. I think you saved more than just the company." "I think Harold did. He just asked me to carry it a little further." That night, I sat at Harold's desk writing in a journal of my own. The first page read, "For Emily, for the grandchildren I might never meet, for the next generation who may face their own crossroads." And underneath I wrote, "True legacy is not wealth. It's who you choose to become when no one's watching." And to those of you still listening to this story, thank you for witnessing this journey with us. If you've lost faith in someone you love, hold on to the possibility of change. If you've been hurt by entitlement or betrayal, remember that accountability and grace can sometimes walk together. And if you're ever entrusted with protecting someone's legacy, do it with courage. You might just save a name. You might save a soul. Don't forget to share this story if it touched your heart, and subscribe for more stories like this. Somewhere another Grace is facing a storm, and your words, your share, your comment may help her find her strength. And as I placed Harold's notebook beside mine on the shelf, I whispered once more into the stillness. "We did it, Harold. We really did."